Pesachim Daf Pekimel. Rabbi Yochanan told us that the shita of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, that you burn the carbon Pesach if the bailam die or become tamei, is even if the bailam die or become tamei after the carbon is completely nisratza after the zrikas adam. Rabbi Yochanan says this is similar to the shita of Rabbi Nechemia, who learned that the reason why the seer shel iron was burnt was because no one was able to eat it because Aaron HaKohen was an oinen, even though the carbon was brought completely b'kedusha and it was kosher. Rabbi wants to suggest that Rabbi Yosef Glili also holds of this halacha because Rabbi Yosef Glili says that the way we know l'doiris that the dam of a carbon pesach that was brought into the heichal or was yotzei from the azara is possible, we know from the seer shel aaron, and Rabbi learns that Rabbi Yosef Glili would also extend that to if the bailam became possible and therefore there was no eichel on the carbon. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And he says from Rabbi Yoshia Glili, you wouldn't necessarily know that if it was a psola bailam, that it would also require sreifa. The next Mishnah tells us that noisar, atzomis, and gittin have to be burnt, but they cannot be burnt on Yom Tov, or even the day after Yom Tov on Shabbos. They could only be burnt on Choil, so it would be the first day Chalamoid or the second day Chalamoid, because the sreifa, sanoisar, is not doicha Shabbos or Yom Tov. Rabbi Yitzchak tells us that bones that house noisar, so bones that had marrow inside them that became noisar, those bones have the same status as noiser, they'll become tamei. The Gemara thought that we'd have a riot from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that you have to burn the bones. It must be because they're holding the noiser, and therefore they have a din of noiser. The Gemara said not necessarily. Maybe our Mishnah holds that even though these bones are puzzle and they're noiser at this point, the isser of breaking the bones still apply even after the bones are noiser. If you can't break the bones open to take out the marrow to burn as noiser, you'd have to burn them together with the bones. And that's why our Mishnah says the bones are burnt. The Gemara says you have to make a distinction, because if bones are also to break even after they're puzzle, that's only if they once had a shasa kosher, meaning the zrika was done, the carbon was allowed to be eaten, and then they became tamei or they became noisar, those bones will still be usher to break. But if the psul happened before this rika and those bones and the meat was never able to be eaten, those bones are allowed to be broken. The Gemara then poses a challenge to Rabbi Yitzchak, because the Brisa tells us that although the bones of regular karbanos don't have to be burnt, the bones of a carbon pesach do have to be burnt. The question is, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, where the bones that house marrow are also have a din of noisor, why is it that they don't have to be burnt? So the Gemara answers, speaking where you found bones that were broken open and had no marrow left in them. So if you found such bones of a regular carbon, we'll assume that all the marrow was eaten before it became noisar, so those bones never housed noisar, and that's why, in fact, they don't have to be burnt. However, by a carbon pesach, you're not allowed to break those bones open. So even if you find bones that are broken open and the marrow removed, you have to assume that that occurred after it became noisar, and therefore the bones have already received the status of noisar and they have to be burnt. The Gemara offers another pshat, is that this brisa is referring to when you found a whole box of bones and the top layer of the bones have the marrow removed. By a regular carbon, you can assume if the marrow was removed from the top layer of bones, the bones below probably have their marrow removed as well, and therefore you don't have to burn it, you can just discard it. However, if it's from a carbon pesach, even though there's no marrow in the bones at the top, you'd have to check all of the bones in the box to make sure that they have no marrow inside them, because otherwise you would have to burn them. Rabbi Yehuda told us that sinews or gittin are considered basar anywhere in the body of the animal except in the neck, because they're hard, they're like wood, so they don't have a din of basar. The Gemara has a problem, because our Mishnah says that you have to burn the sinews, you have to burn the gittin. Now if it's the gittin in the rest of the body, it's like any other meat, so the Mishnah wouldn't have had to specifically say gittin. And if it's referring to the bones and the sinews in the neck, that would be contradictory to what we just said from Rav, that they don't have it in a basar. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah is referring to the gid hanosha. And either it would be a suffix, either we would hold that it's a suffix which one of the two gidin, the right side or the left side, it's a suffix which one is asr. Therefore you can't eat either of them, but they both have a status of basar, and therefore you would have to burn them as noisar. The second pshat the Gemara says is, even if we know that it's only the right side that has an isser of gid, but the left side is like regular basar, it could be speaking where we got mixed up, and we have these two gittin, and we don't know which one came from the right side, which one came from the left side. Therefore, misafik, you're not allowed to eat either one, but misafik, you also have to burn both of them as noiser. A third pshat that the Gemara offered is that the Mishnah is not speaking about the gid itself, it's talking about the fat around the gid, and that's only asur midrabanan. So therefore, you can't eat it, but it would still have to be burned as noiser. And the fourth pshat that the Gemara offered was that the gid splits. It splits. Part of the gid goes on the outer side of the thigh bone, and part of it goes on the inner side of the thigh bone. The part that goes on the outer side of the thigh bone is only osher midarabanan. Therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it, but you would have to burn it as noiser. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says that the mitzvah of sreifas of noiser is not doicha yomtiv. Correct the Gemara, why not? Asay doicha loisaseh. The Gemara offers 4 reasons. Either because we have a pasuk that says ad boiker, meaning the noiser shouldn't be burnt until the second morning. So that's how we know it can't be burnt on Yom Tov. Or we learn it from Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi, which teaches us that you're not allowed to process any carbon from choil on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the carbon Pesach, which is a carbon of choil, you wouldn't be able to do anything for it on Shabbos and Yom Tov, so you surely wouldn't be able to burn its noiser. Or we learn it from the pasuk of Hu levada ye'aseh lechem, which is talking about what's allowed to be done on Yom Tov, only malachas of Eichel Nefesh, and who tells you that machshirei Eichel Nefesh may not be done on Yom Tov. Anything that could have been done before or after Yom Tov is not allowed to be done on Yom Tov, so burning the noiser wouldn't be able to be done on Yom Tov. The Gemara says we also learn from here that a bris, mila, shalei bezman is not doicha Yom Tov. And Rav Ashi says that this is not a case of asay doicha loisaseh, because Yom Tov is both an asay and a loisaseh, and an asay for sure is not doicha loisaseh v'asay.